Are you someone who feels like you're always on the outside looking in? Like, no matter how hard you try to fit in, you're just left feeling like something's wrong with you because you just can't seem to. Do you feel like maybe you were born at the wrong time, place, or even planet? Well, if you do, you're not alone. I felt this way my whole life. At first, it felt like a curse to me. However, slowly but surely, I have come to realize that me being an outsider or a misfit has actually been a huge blessing in disguise. And hopefully, by the end of this video, you'll understand why and maybe even feel the same way. But first, let us go to the place where it all begins inside our psyche. We live in a world of narratives. What is a narrative? It's just a fancy way of saying the word story. I'm all for simplicity, but I just like the way this word sounds. Anyway, our brain is naturally curious, so it desires to constantly understand and explore things. And as a result of this tendency, we knowingly or unknowingly assign certain meanings and reasons to the experiences we have in our lives. These meanings and reasons are then stitched together in a certain way inside our minds, which, when zoomed out, reveals a narrative. Narratives help us understand and give context to things in our lives. Not only that, it is the stories we choose to constantly tell ourselves that greatly influence the choices and actions we take in our lives. Our narratives hugely shape who we are as individuals. These stories exist and play out on multiple levels. As soon as we're born, we start absorbing unconscious narratives from people around us, which then go on to become conscious and collective narratives that play out throughout our lives. We can experience these narratives in three different forms within ourselves: thinking, feeling, and acting. For example, if you have a narrative of unworthiness, you will think you are not enough. You will feel broken or not whole internally, and you will act in ways that reflect how you think or feel, like not standing up for yourself or hiding behind a mask. All three of these feed off of each other and get reflected through our personalities, which, by the way, other people can pick up on, and then they oftentimes reflect the same back to us, which further reaffirms our narrative. When these stories are agreed or disagreed upon on a collective level, they together map out some very important concepts in our human civilization that dictate the path we go down on our journey through time. There was a time when we didn't exist, and one day we just did. An infant doesn't know what its existence means or how he or she is supposed to behave. Slowly, as we grow up, we are trained to fit into the social structure that exists at the time. This training is primarily led by our parents or family according to the narratives they subscribe to, be it conscious or unconscious. For example, if a child's parents have unworthiness wounds that they are not aware of, they are bound to project that onto their child unconsciously. Or if there is a narrative in your family of a lack mindset, chances are you will take that on as well. This is what generational trauma is: limiting or unconscious narratives passed down through generations that can only be broken when someone from the lineage finally decides to stop and look at what is happening inside them and why. If you recognize certain limiting narratives within yourselves that were likely passed to you through your parents or ancestors, feel free to feel hurt. But don't blame them, because it was likely passed to them from their parents, and so on. And even if the trauma didn't originate generations ago, blaming still isn't helpful, because first of all, no one is out there seeking traumas. And secondly, blaming puts us in a victim energy, which is disempowering for ourselves and causes us to give up our power, which means we do not have the power to cause change. And ultimately, we want to change the narratives that don't serve us. Oftentimes, as a result of conditioning from collective narratives, people find themselves stuck inside a box, trying to please everyone else's narratives around them so that they can feel a sense of belonging and acceptance from their external environment. To them, what they're doing with their existence might seem like the obvious thing to do, because that's what most people around them are doing. And how can the majority of people be wrong? Well, I don't think there is a fixed right or wrong way of being. There might be a right or wrong way of being for an individual, but that right or wrong cannot be defined by anyone other than that individual themselves. Most people who are absolutely sure about what they're supposed to do with their existence don't always realize that it is just their perspective, which is very much conditioned by the majority of perspectives around them. What they're so sure about is not born from their own independent or rational thinking, but from a collective narrative. And as a result of people forcing themselves to live in a way that seems right according to mainstream narratives, they might find themselves in a place where they have to constantly seek validation, showcase themselves as being happy or successful, and even make others feel inferior so that they themselves can feel superior and good. Such people aren't necessarily evil or bad. They're probably like that because they might not be able to give themselves things like validation, happiness, and fulfillment internally because they are not living in alignment with their true being in the first place. I just want to clarify that I am not trying to speak against insiders or people who follow the mainstream in this video. It's just that I am myself an outsider, and from my perspective, I've found more often than not that so many people try to bend and mold themselves according to mainstream narratives to be validated and yet at the same time be perpetually miserable. There is so much value for us all in embracing our inherent nature and working with it rather than against it. If you are someone who follows mainstream narratives in life and feels truly fulfilled, congratulations, you have nothing to be offended about. I'm in no way encouraging people to completely reject mainstream narratives. I'm simply asking if these narratives feel true or fulfilling to you. And if they don't, you have two choices. Carry on with your day and forget about any of this. Or you can find stillness and ask yourself which way of living would feel truly fulfilling to you. After all, fulfillment can be found in many different areas of life. You just have to put in the time and effort to look within and find it. Because when people are not fulfilled from within, they are bound to seek that fulfillment externally. This lack of fulfillment is the very thing that takes the form of addictions like material possessions, external validation, empty relationships, mindless consumption of media, drug or alcohol abuse, etc., which makes people feel good in the moment but leaves them with a hunger even greater than before that can never be satisfied externally. I'm also not saying seeking pleasure and fulfillment externally is bad. It is a great luxury of life, but only depending on things outside yourself to feel good is simply not sustainable for us or the planet we call home. The level of suffering we humans go through and cause because of our distorted narratives is very tragic for our whole planet. Wiping out entire species, waging wars against each other, robbing the earth of its resources, overconsumption, and generating so much waste. The mental health epidemic, being disconnected from nature and ultimately ourselves. These are the results of ignorance, indifference, insecurity, greed, unworthiness, and living in an exclusively material reality. How did we even get to this point? No other living creature has accomplished so much destruction and suffering. Well, there's no straight answer to this question. But I feel like two of the biggest reasons we are in this position are because we suppress our traumas and pass them on to our children, and because of our distorted collective narratives like us versus them mentality, or systems that promote consumerism while directly targeting people's lack of inherent worth. At the end of it all is deep inadequacy, insecurity, and fear. These are all things that cause us to run from looking within because confronting them is honestly very scary. But on the positive side, we as a collective are now beginning to open up to these scary things. We are starting to purge out our historical traumas collectively and are becoming more aware of our distortions. Although it is just the start and there is much work to be done, it still gives us some hope. Hope that says, maybe, just maybe, someday we will remember our connection to nature and realize we're a part of it and not above it. Maybe we'll find our inherent worth and stop being a consumption monster and stop being so shitty to other people because of our own insecurities. Maybe we'll be more grateful for what we already have and not need more because we'll be content within ourselves. And by the time we reach there, we'll know our own worth, love ourselves and others, forgive easily, and live happier lives overall. Can you imagine that? Maybe we won't reach there anytime soon, but if we all collectively do the inner work, I'm sure a world like that won't be so hard to imagine. Something that most people fail to realize is that our narratives are highly creative and subjective in nature. After all, our narrative is nothing more than just a perspective. If you think of the truth as a 3D shape, our singular perspective only allows us to look at it from one point of view. But when you master the ability to see things from multiple points of view, you come to realize that all the perspectives are true on their own level. That's what it means to be open minded. Not necessarily agreeing to see things in a way that doesn't feel good to you, but recognizing that they have their own place and reasons to exist. Once we become open minded to multiple points of view, we can then choose which ones we want to play with. In this way, we become the creators of our own narrative of life. After all, it is our creativity that makes us different from any other living creature. Without our creativity, we're nothing more than a bunch of monkeys, or perhaps even worse from a survival standpoint. It is what gives us this extraordinary power to bend and shape our whole planet's reality, not only physically, but mentally and emotionally as well. And once we understand this, we can start subscribing to narratives that feel genuinely good to us, don't cause so much destruction, and don't actively put us in a state of lack or fear. Now, getting back to talking about outsiders, it should be pretty evident by this point that outsiders are just people for whom mainstream narratives and ways of being don't feel natural or make sense. These are the people who feel limited by existing systems and grow more when they're allowed to flow in their own way or create their own systems. Just like that, insiders are people who don't find it difficult to adhere to mainstream narratives. These people benefit a lot from systems and feel safe growing within them. There's also a third kind, closeted outsiders. These are people who don't naturally fit in with insiders but force themselves to do so, either because of external pressure or to ease their insecurities. What happens with closeted outsiders is that they are denied the freedom to flow naturally in their childhood. So, to feel safe, they mold themselves to fit inside a system that doesn't necessarily allow them to truly grow, but also disables the attacks that might come towards them if they were just being themselves. Because of the way we humans have evolved, we have unlocked the power of creativity. This power opens up infinite possibilities within us. But we also live in a material world that lies within the bounds of space and time. And because of that, it is only possible for us to progress in a linear way externally. So, for the sake of survival and to understand our external reality in a coherent way, our brain creates and follows linear narratives that are impossible to turn off, at least for people who don't dedicate their lives to doing that. Anyway, narratives are only a small part of our internal landscape. There's a whole world beyond them that is just as deep as the boundlessness of space. A part of that inner world is our nature. The nature I'm talking about here is the inherent essence or quality of something. Our nature is a part of ourselves that exists on a deeper level than narratives. We all have certain inherent qualities in different amounts within ourselves that, when combined, reveal our unique selves. Qualities like being creative, analytical, philosophical, logical, empathic, adaptable, etc. Then there are certain qualities that are more valued by mainstream narratives than others. This leads to people suppressing certain inherent qualities within themselves and with them their true nature. And when a part of our nature is not allowed to be expressed, we can feel empty, broken, insecure, or like outsiders. Now, if you're still not sure about whether you're a closeted outsider or an insider, let me show you some indicators. You're a closeted outsider if 1. You feel like your life has absolutely no purpose or meaning. Just because you couldn't find meaning within mainstream ways of being doesn't mean there isn't any outside of it. If that's you, you need to start getting to know yourself. If you don't know how to do that, I recommend checking out these two videos. I have briefly explained how you can start getting to know yourself in them. Just check the timestamps if you don't want to watch the entire videos. 2. You feel like no one understands you. You feel this way likely because you don't actually show your true nature to people around you, because you might fear being judged or rejected. People judging or rejecting you for being yourself doesn't necessarily say anything about you, but instead about them. Learn to let go of people who would want to bend or mold you for their own comfort or to feel superior. The right people will love you as you are, but for that, you need to first act like your true self to even find them. 3. You feel disconnected from people in groups and prefer to observe rather than participate. If you feel like you don't have anything to say or add while interacting with a group, you're not necessarily boring, stupid, or uncool. Chances are, you just don't find their conversations meaningful or interesting. Do yourself a favor and find another group with similar interests. 4. You feel uncomfortable or uneasy in social settings. This might be because you feel too conscious of how you are perceived by others. You might have past wounds from people telling you you're either too much or not enough. So your brain is constantly trying to predict how people perceive you to feel safe. You don't necessarily have to fit all of these descriptions to be a closeted outsider. These are just some things that I have personally observed and experienced. It is very likely that there are more indicators I don't know about. Regardless of which category you're in, it is very important to tend to a true nature because ultimately, no one else can experience our life on our behalf. So, it isn't fair to let others dictate it, no matter how pure their intentions might seem. A way of being that doesn't feel true to you isn't worth living. If I'm being honest, being an outsider or a closeted outsider for that matter can feel very shitty and isolating. Even the people who have the courage to be themselves can have difficulties existing amongst people who subscribe to mainstream narratives because we've been fed this narrative that being different or an outsider is bad or unsafe. This is because we humans are naturally afraid of what we do not understand, because in our minds it holds the possibility of hurting us. The result of this fear is that people impose their narratives on anyone who rocks their boat by being different, which can make outsiders who are insecure constantly doubt themselves and be afraid of expressing their truth. So, it is understandable why some people might want to pretend to be someone they inherently are not. I'm not suggesting you instantly adopt your true identity and abandon the old one. That might even cause more problems which you might not be equipped to deal with. The first step would be to just become aware of what's going on inside you and how you feel about it. Once we become aware of our true nature, we can then start to slowly shift our steps towards it, and with time, we might find ourselves walking in a completely different direction that feels more fulfilling to us. It is when we are living in our truth that we can truly feel at peace within ourselves, be content, find fulfillment, form meaningful relationships, improve our mental and emotional health, become genuinely confident, and maybe even inspire others to live more authentically. Now, I would like to share my experience of being an outsider my whole life. But before getting into it, I would quickly like to mention that I only share my personal experiences to provide context and to show you where I'm coming from. My aim is not to make anyone feel sorry for my bad experiences, because I certainly don't. I only share them so that someone might relate, find hope, and feel empowered by me sharing how I overcame certain obstacles in my life. Thank you so much for listening to the disclaimers. Now let's get into it. There have been multiple aspects of my inherent nature that have made me feel like an outsider over the span of my life. I will share 4 of the most prominent ones with you today. On the surface, all 4 of them seem like negative or undesirable qualities to have. But together, with the help of some awareness and self-evolution, they have revealed themselves to be some of my greatest strengths. First is me being a quiet person. I have always been a quiet person, and that has caused me a lot of pain in the past. It led to things like people stepping all over me because I wouldn't speak up for myself or others, and even myself believing that I didn't have anything to say because I was stupid. After getting to know myself, I realized that being quiet helped me become a good listener and absorb a lot of information from my surroundings. It also protected me in a way from people molding me into someone I'm not, because you cannot mold what you cannot see. It was good for me to stay hidden while I learned many lessons from life until I was able to step up and protect my true self. Next is me being a slow person. This quality is one of the biggest reasons I struggled so much in school. I got attacked and laughed at a lot because of this quality of mine. But it was my slowness that taught me how to become patient, learn delayed gratification, pay attention to details, do things more mindfully, and be more present in the moment. Now, whenever I make art, my slowness helps me lose myself in it and become one with what I'm creating, which also increases the quality of my creation. In that state, time ceases to exist, and so does my sense of self. Third is me being an emotional and empathic person. As a child, I was praised for not expressing my emotions. It was a part of me that was suppressed the earliest. Add not being able to understand or express emotions to being an empath, and what you get is lots of toxic relationships. I just want to quickly clarify that I never use the word relationship to denote a romantic one. I just use it in general terms. Anyway, because of my empathic nature and lack of emotional understanding or boundaries, I gave away too much of myself to people who didn't deserve to have access to me. I allowed miserable people to make me miserable, not to imply that I wasn't miserable on my own already. I could always feel and understand what other people were feeling internally. So, I used to shrink myself and become whoever people needed me to be to avoid conflict and to make them feel comfortable at my own expense. I didn't really know how to work with these two qualities of mine until I started understanding myself. And when I did, I realized my empathic nature helps me stand in other people's shoes and understand them on a deep level. It helps me become more open minded, non judgmental, and compassionate towards other people's experiences. My emotional and empathic nature is what allows people to feel comfortable enough to really be themselves in my presence. I'm also not at all resentful for my emotions being suppressed early on, because if I was always connected to them, I probably would have gotten lost in them because of the tough lessons I've had to learn. I feel so deeply now, but I'm also not very attached to my emotions. I just let them flow through me as a wave does in the ocean. The last is my bad memory. This one is the most shocking of them all. I mean, how can anyone think bad memory can be a strength? I will explain, but first listen to my struggles with this quality. I obviously sucked at school because at the time I was in school, the Indian education system was based on memorizing stuff and not actual learning. And I'm not even going to pretend I know what it's like at the moment because I don't have a clue. Anyway, my memory isn't too bad where it's a huge problem. It's just that my mind straight up refuses to remember random information. And that is especially the case with something I don't care about. I even forget people who aren't close to me or interesting in my opinion. My bad memory is the reason why I never lie unnecessarily. I just can't keep up. And that is something that has kept me real over the years and stopped me from spinning fake identities for the sake of acceptance or people pleasing. Not only that, it keeps me from getting too stuck in old patterns and beliefs that don't serve me. It also helps me to not get too attached to a version of myself or a way of being. I easily forget other people's opinions and freely form my own. It is what allows me to keep an open mind and constantly grow as a person. Overall, it really helps me to let go of the old and be open to the new. Now, clearly, even with the perspective shift, these qualities aren't suited for most systems out there. This is exactly what I realized last year when I was on the verge of dropping out of college. Obviously, not in this detail. These revelations are fairly recent. But I realized I would always be miserable if I continued to diminish my real self, and there was no way I would thrive in a system that required me to hustle and just not value the qualities I have within me inherently. I honestly fear not being authentic much more than death itself. I just cannot imagine living a life where I have to bend and mold myself to fit in and still be miserable. No thanks. I'm good just being myself. Even if it means my life doesn't amount to much according to societal narratives. But that's just me. I don't suggest people to go down paths similar to mine if it doesn't feel true to them. What I'm trying to say is that there is nothing to be ashamed of if you fear forging your own path and feel more safe moving through a path that is pre-existing within a system. Likewise, there is nothing to be ashamed of if the systems that are already available feel too limiting and you desire to forge your own path. My inherent nature just happens to gravitate towards the latter. And if I'm being honest, I'm not immune to self-doubt. I certainly do have those moments. But what I've noticed is that each time I go through them, I find myself more confident, comfortable in my own skin, and much more stronger on the other side. There is tremendous value in us being connected to our true nature. On the surface, it might seem like our own well-being or happiness does not have the power to impact the people we come across, but it does. We are all very deeply and incomprehensibly interconnected with each other on a conscious, subconscious, and unconscious level. Honestly, I can't even explain how because I'm only starting to scratch the surface of understanding this. But what I do know is that when someone lets go of their limitations and goes towards their true potential, they inevitably either inspire people to go towards their own potential or trigger them to look at why they think they cannot. When someone is triggered, they have three options: attack what or who triggered them, suppress the trigger itself, or get curious about how something on the outside can have such an impact on them internally, which leads them to be inspired to take steps towards their own potential. Attacking and suppressing are the only things to be avoided here because they don't serve anyone. Also, keep in mind that I'm saying this in the context of people getting triggered by someone being their true selves and nothing truly threatening. I feel like during this time of radical change, being an outsider is kind of like having a superpower because we live in a time of uncertainty and we don't know when the next big thing will happen and completely change the trajectory of our lives. Since outsiders are usually not subscribed to mainstream narratives, they can effectively look at and point out flaws within these mainstream ways of being, which insiders might not be able to do because of a lack of perspective or their own biases. Outsiders also tend to think outside the box because they are literally not inside a mainstream one. Not only that, outsiders have the potential to become great leaders because they have to become resilient and independent to even exist as themselves. Besides that, they also tend to be more open minded because they are very aware of their own differences. So they don't default to assuming what someone or something is like without actually becoming curious. A person who is deeply integrated within a system is unlikely to be able to change patterns that perpetuate suffering. Because when someone is so used to existing in one way, it might seem to them that it is the only possible way of being. And so, it is an outsider's job to step up and steer change in a positive direction. Because change is inevitable regardless of whether it is done from a place of having clear vision or from a place of blindness. My heart speaks directly to closeted outsiders to let them know that who they are is something so much bigger and better than just being a victim of their past experiences. The world desperately needs people to accept their differences and ultimately see similarities within us all so that we can be ourselves and serve each other in our own unique way, because ultimately we are one. That is all I have to express for today. Thank you so much for sticking around and listening to what I have in my heart. If this video has impacted you in any way, feel free to tell me how in the comment section below. I'm so grateful for all the lovely comments in my previous videos. They do not go unnoticed. I would also really appreciate it if you would share this video with your friends or on any social media platform so that more people can join us on this journey. Thank you so much for coming on this art trip with me, and I'll see you in the next one.